We are a few days into free agency, and there has already been a massive amount of movement already just in these couple of days, with still even some more signings yet to go. But as of this moment, we're recording on Wednesday night. So throughout everything that has happened through the past couple of days, we basically have a list of the most meaningful, most impactful free agent signings over the past couple of days. So I think, Justin, we can just start it off with, I mean, we can make like a whole entire separate show on everything the Seahawks have been doing. Basically, even tagging in, the trades with Geno and DK even before free agency. So why don't we just have a Seahawks conversation? So as I mentioned, they trade away Geno Smith to the Vegas Raiders for a third-round pick. Then they trade away DK Metcalf to the Steelers for a second-round pick. And then DK then signs a 5-year, $150 million contract with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then free agency, their big signing, of course, at least offensively, was signing Sam Darnold to a 3-year, $100 million deal that they reportedly offered to Geno, and then he turned it down, and then thus they traded Geno away to Vegas. So this new offense it's definitely a new offense, to say the least. Their piece is gone. We have a new offensive coordinator in there too with Kubiak. So why don't we can just start with Geno Smith, and then we can kind of work our way down through the three moves. What are you feeling about this whole entire ordeal?
The Geno Smith trade, like Geno himself is not necessarily the most fantasy relevant quarterback. Like in 2 QB leagues, I think this is fine because look, he gets reunited with Pete Carroll where he had that initial resurgence. But really, I think the big winner is going to be Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers. Regardless of what you think of Geno, whether you think he's elite or not, which I think most people would agree he's not, he is undoubtedly an upgrade from Minshew and O'Connell. I think without a doubt. So Brock Bowers, who we just saw have a historic rookie season, this is massive. This is absolutely massive for Brock Bowers. And Jacoby Myers is, I think, another one that people are, if you've watched this channel, I talk about Jacoby Myers ad nauseum. I'm excited for Jacoby Myers. And maybe they go out and add a Ted McMillan and get a true wide receiver one. But, I mean, just all the pass catchers, this offense as a whole, should see their floor raised because Geno is capable of leading a borderline top 10 offense when he needs to at this point in his career. So I think that's a massive win for Vegas and all their weapons.
Yeah, especially when you got Chip Kelly coming in too from Ohio State. So, I mean, we've seen the Chip Kelly stuff before in the NFL, but I mean, he runs a very fast-paced offense. I don't expect Geno to be as good as what he was in Seattle, but he still is going to have, like you just mentioned, Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers. Maybe it's not, a wide receiver where they pick like 6th or 8th or something like that, a top 10 pick. Maybe it's not a top 10 wide receiver, but maybe they add somebody else to still be, that wide receiver 2 or the 1B with Jacoby Myers, and then Trey Tucker's kind of their speedy wide receiver 3. They could still sign a free agent. There's a couple of veteran free agents that are still out there. I mean, it's not going to be anybody uber magnificent, but Amari Cooper, Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, they could throw money at one of them and still have like a pretty solid situation for Geno. I think he's a QB3 in Dynasty, especially because of his age. But he's going to be a very streamable guy, I think, if you just are able to, pick and choose those right weeks.
Yeah, I think the one thing that could offset maybe the efficiency and the weapon drop-off that he's going from Seattle to Vegas is the speed of the offense, like you mentioned. Like the volume itself could see a meaningful uptick. Maybe Pete Carroll does Pete Carroll things and drags everybody down into the mud from a speed perspective, but it's an interesting flyer on Geno, like you said, as a QB3 in Superflex leagues.
So let's move on to DK Metcalf. And I feel like I have a personal say in what goes on here as a Steelers fan. Yeah. My initial reaction, so I was like in the middle of like cooking dinner and I see my phone. It's like DK Metcalf got traded to the Steelers. I'm like, holy crap, dude. Like that's a magnificent move for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And yet I think it is so bad for fantasy football. Like it's just like I was so conflicted because I was happy as a Steelers fan that we got another wide receiver weapon. But I was conflicted because I just don't know if this is necessarily a good thing for fantasy football. I mean, one, still don't have a quarterback. I still have no idea who it's going to be. I don't know if it's going to be Russ. I don't know if it's going to be Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers apparently has ghosted everybody. He's just like in the dark and is not telling anybody what he's doing.
Ayahuasca, baby. Let's do it.
Please don't be Aaron Rodgers. I'm low-key hoping that they make a move for like Jackson Dart or somebody in the rookie draft. At least, try to infuse some youth into this offense and give it a shot to do something and not do the Indianapolis Colts thing of, Rivers and, Matt Ryan and Carson Wentz. And until eventually they made their move for their rookie, which, doesn't necessarily work out. But, I don't think Dart is a bad quarterback. Anyway, that's a Steelers thing.
Yes, that's a whole tangent.
Whole other thing. But yeah, I just don't think that DK Metcalf in Pittsburgh is all that different of what of the situation that he's coming from Seattle, where he's going to be competing with George Pickens like he was competing with Lockett and JSN. It's not going to be a high volume passing offense. I just think that he's still going to be what he was in Seattle, which is a high ceiling guy on a weekly basis, but also really inconsistent, really low floor guy. And that's, that kind of sucks for 2025. I think whenever we heard that he was on the trade block that, we were hoping that for a much better landing spot, like in Green Bay or, the Chargers or something that could elevate that floor and raise the ceiling in a better offense with a better quarterback. And we just don't have that in Pittsburgh. I will say, I think the one good thing is that it might be rough for 2025, but I do think that George Pickens is gone next year because I highly doubt they pay both of these guys at least that kind of money. And it at least seems like they believe that DK Metcalf is essentially a better version of George Pickens, like all the way through.
Yeah, we don't see a lot of this from the Steelers. Like they draft homegrown wide receiver talent, seeing them go out on the market and get a guy. And they were in the mix for Ayuk and other wide receivers as well. So they know this has been a glaring issue. I mean, they took Roman Wilson in the second last year. Like they have identified this is a problem on the team. But I agree with what you're saying. I kind of want to talk about the value then for DK because I think, look, I can say the same things you've said and not going to help us. We can burn a bunch of time here. Are you trading a 2025 late first for DK Metcalf?
I don't think I could right now, just because it's not so much that like, I think that that you could just replace DK with a better wide receiver in this class. Maybe you get Egbuka or maybe Travis Hunter if you want to go that route, which would be interesting. But it's just, I feel like a late first right now is just a little bit too much to give up for Metcalf, who I just believe is still going to be the same player that he has been in Seattle. And that I think is largely replaceable. Like I'd rather go pay a second for Jacoby Myers than a first for DK Metcalf. And I'm probably going to have very similar production. And
I can tell you do not have to pay a second for Jacoby Myers. You can probably get away with 2/3. Would you do it for George Pickens?
Nope, definitely not. I would rather have Metcalf than Pickens. So
okay, so is Pickens dropping down your dynasty ranks? No, and this is where I think we talk about this a lot, like not overreacting necessarily to situation. So that's where I struggle with this because they're both good, like they're good wide receivers. I've given up. Like I understand George Pickens is a guy. I've lost that battle. But not saying you're not giving up a late first for, I'm looking at DLF right now on the rankings. He's wide receiver 21. DK Metcalf is wide receiver 23. Now, obviously, this has not been updated post-trade.
I was going to say, I have KTC. DK Metcalf is wide receiver 22. Pickens fell to 30. He's dropped 9 spots, and Metcalf's actually risen up 6 spots.
Interesting. That feels interesting. I would expect things to stay a little more stagnant than that. I understand the Pickens drop. So are you paying an early second for either?
I would pay an early second for DK Metcalf.
You're that out on Pickens, really?
I might probably still pay an early second for Pickens, but I just feel like there's probably something better I could do with that second. Maybe that second's probably an easier piece to move than George Pickens is if you want to upgrade somewhere or take it into the season. You know, if it's a 2026 second or something like that, like take it into the season and use it if you are a contender and see where you actually need to use it in season.
Last one I'll throw out, and we'll talk about this later. Wide receiver again later. Say Jalen McMillan and a mid-second for DK Metcalf. Again, a wide receiver that probably is probably going to drop in value because Godwin re-signed. Would you take the rookie and the second for DK Metcalf?
So just to wrap up the whole entire Seattle situation, Sam Darnold signing with the Seattle Seahawks. My quick thing on this is that it was a very predictable thing that he was going to be in a worse situation than the Minnesota Vikings, no matter where he signed. I mean, he earned himself a lot of money. Congratulations, Sam Darnold. But it was just very predictable that wherever he signed, all of the locations and teams that needed a quarterback, and Seattle wasn't even on that list initially until they traded away Geno, but then they traded away DK, and it was very predictable that he was going to go to a worse situation with a worse offensive coordinator or offensive mind, a worse weapon room around him, and he was just going to lose value. And I just feel like that's where we're at right now with Sam Darnold. Do you have any other thoughts?
No, he's a QB3 with some upside. I think, maybe he'll get a value bump when the Seahawks inevitably draft like a Trey Harris as like a DK Metcalf replacement. Like just pencil that one in right now, I think. But yeah, QB3 with some upside. JSN, I think, is pretty stagnant because he's the only weapon there now, and that might account for the drop off in QB play a little bit. So I think perfectly fine on the Darnold side.
But enough with the Seattle Seahawks. We could probably, like I said, we can make a whole show about what they've been doing and what they probably will continue to be doing as they build out this new offense. Let's move on to a quarterback that I think we both have been personally victimized by because he's played for both of our teams. But now he's found a new home with the New York Jets. Justin Fields signs a 2-year, $40 million deal. And so he's now, at least presumably, the new starting quarterback for the New York Jets. Whether or not he's a starter for both those years of that deal, I'm not necessarily sold on. But I think for now, at least it seems like for the first half, for the first, or for at least 2025, Justin Fields is the starter for the New York Jets. So obviously this is, I think it's a big win for Justin Fields. I feel like you're in the same boat as me. It's just like when he's a starter, he's a QB1 just because he rushes. And that's kind of where we're at with Justin Fields. But I think the bigger conversation needs to lie with how does this impact Breece Hall and how does this impact Garrett Wilson? Because, of course, Javonte is no longer in the scene. And there's really no other wide receivers there, at least currently in New York. So, Justin, what do you think on all of this?
So I think I want to start with Garrett Wilson because that's most directly tied to quarterback performance and everything there. So, look, we can just go back to last season. We just talked about George Pickens, how he was a top 20 wide receiver or a borderline top 20 wide receiver on DLF. And the reason mainly was because of what he did last season. But it wasn't because of what he did with Justin Fields. It's because of what he did with Russell Wilson. The splits for George Pickens last year, 9.7 points per game when Justin Fields was the starter, 16 points per game when Russell Wilson was the starter. Now, that's not to say Garrett Wilson's fried. Because, look, I don't think Garrett Wilson's going to be all that upset because his college quarterback is now his starting quarterback in the NFL. So like that rapport, that kind of chemistry might bounce back really quickly and it might turn into fireworks. But the track record right now is Justin Fields is not a great passing quarterback. He's not great at supporting high level wide receiver production week in and week out. So like you look at Garrett Wilson and it is going to, I think overall, my gut feeling is this is going to be a bumpy ride in 2025. 2026, like you said, is a bit up in the air with a good quarterback class coming in. I think the Jets aren't going to be very good. So they may be right back in this same situation next year, looking to draft a quarterback, and then Fields is out the door. But that's just how I feel for Garrett Wilson right now. When you look at Breece Hall, this is interesting because, look, it has been proven running backs do better on the ground when they are tied to a rushing quarterback. It opens up lanes. It stresses the defense on the ground. I mean, Chicago had one of the best rushing offenses, if not the best rushing offense in the NFL the last time Fields played for them. That's going to benefit Breece Hall. It's going to benefit Braylon Allen. Where Breece Hall is inevitably going to get hurt is obviously touchdown upside because Fields takes work away on the ground. And this offense probably will not be scoring a lot. I'd be shocked if they were a high-scoring offense. But the other piece is the receiving work. That is where Breece Hall makes his money for the most part in fantasy, right? He has just been this high-volume pass catcher. It's hard to be a high-volume pass catcher when you're not throwing all that much. So that's my big concern. Look, I'm not going to move Breece Hall outside of my top 12 running backs. I still think he is a borderline top 12, top 10 guy. But this idea that he's like a penciled-in top 3 running back, that gets really, really difficult to get on board with. Because I think the situation is not going to lend itself this season to a successful year for fantasy at least by Breece Hall's expectations.
So obviously there's massive reaction on Twitter. My immediate reaction to this that I tweeted out was just that Garrett Wilson is dead for fantasy, to which everybody and their mother replied to me saying, whoa, well, they played together, so obviously Garrett Wilson's going to be great. Oh, you seem to forget that DJ Moore's best year was with Justin Fields, and like as if I forgot either one of those two facts. As a Penn State fan hating Ohio State, of course I remember that they played together, and of course I remember that DJ Moore's best season was with Justin Fields, because that was my argument for why I was in on Pickens last year. Didn't come to fruition. I did find a few very interesting stats that kind of just continue to showcase how weird this offense might be in 2025. So number one, Justin Fields was first in deep throw rates versus man coverage over 2023 and 2024 at a 22.5% clip. For comparison, Aaron Rodgers was 34th at 12.5%. Zach Wilson was dead last at 5%. So that looks very good that Justin Fields at least seems to be willing to throw the deep ball. And Garrett Wilson is a very good separator, especially going deep. You can also see this reflected in DJ Moore's and George Pickens' yards per game on just deep passes alone. DJ Moore averaged 27.7 yards per game in 2023 with Fields. That was 8th of the position. Pickens last year in those first 6 weeks with Fields averaged 33 yards per game, which was first among the wide receivers. Garrett Wilson in 2023 and 2024 was 47th among wide receivers, averaging only 12 yards per game, because Wilson and Rodgers didn't really like to throw deep all that much, or at least not as
Noodle
much
arm
as Justin Fields. Yes.
Noodle arms.
Where this story takes a turn for the worst is that Justin Fields was dead last in deep ball accuracy in 2024 and was 36th among 44 qualifying quarterbacks on first read target last year, 38th in first read target in 2023. So it's just so weird, I think, for Garrett Wilson. I think we're returning to what he was like with, Zach Wilson and the
Mike
myriad
White.
of other, all those other weird, like he's going to have good weeks. He's going to have really bad weeks. Maybe at the end of the year, because he plays 17 games, he's going to be a top 20 guy, but you're not going to feel like he's a top 20 guy. Even this year, he was a top 10 wide receiver this year with Aaron Rodgers. I don't think you felt like he was a top 10 wide receiver at all outside of like that 3 or 4 week stretch before Davante Adams got there. So I just, it's rough for Garrett Wilson for sure. And I really, really hope that he has to get traded or
not now. I think this placates him a little bit. Like this is going to be probably enough to be like, oh, I'm good. And then 2026, he's going to ask for a trade, or they're going to draft a rookie. And then you got to go through the rookie growing pains. Like Garrett Wilson's in a tough spot right now. And I'm not going to trade a wide receiver for situation-based problems, because they change year to year, right? He didn't have Rodgers. He had Rodgers. Now he doesn't have Rodgers. It moves quickly with these dysfunctional organizations. So it's going to be really interesting. I don't think he's asking for a trade this offseason, though.
But then we can put a bow on the entire Steelers, like going on and everything with free agency, with Najee Harris signing a 1-year, $5.5 million deal with the LA Chargers. So the Pittsburgh now has an opening at RB1, presumably. Jaylen Warren is back in Pittsburgh. They tendered him at a second round level. And then they did sign Kenneth Gainwell to a 1-year deal. So that's kind of wrapping up everything that's going on, at least in Pittsburgh. With I think the big headline here being, of course, that Najee is presumably the new starter in LA, kind of following in J.K. Dobbins' 1-year contract footsteps. So I think this is a great landing spot for Najee. I'm kind of in on him as a buy low right now. I don't even know if you can buy low because he's in LA. Maybe after the NFL draft, he could be a good guy for contenders. But
I think you can buy low because, look, there's such a negative aura surrounding Najee Harris because, look, objectively, he's boring. He is boring as hell, which that's fair. He's been a boring player. Like, I get the sentiment because I think it matches what we've seen from Najee. Again, 3.9 yards per carry for his career. Not that yards per carry is the end all be all, but like that paints a picture. 3.9, 3.8, 4.1, 4.0. He's just a very average player. But average players in high-powered offenses pay off. Like, I think Rico Dowdle's a really good example of that from last year at the Cowboys. That offense was above average, shockingly, with Rico Dowdle on the ground, like supporting running back production. J.K. Dobbins was electric with the Chargers this year. Najee Harris is going to be a mid-level RB2. Mm-hmm. Whether we like it or not, assuming he survives the draft, that is where this is headed. Because Harbaugh will run the ball in the red zone. Gus Edwards is gone. Obviously, J.K. Dobbins is currently not with the team. They could always bring him back, but right now he's not on that roster. He's going to score 10 touchdowns, run for 1,050 yards, and catch like 25 passes. And it's going to be an RB2. It's going to be gross. It's never going to be fun, but he will help win people titles. Like that is exactly how this is going to play out.
The way that you worded that whole entire thing reminded me specifically of a tweet that you had last year, where I think it was in July or August or something like that. And all you tweeted out was Joe Mixon's going to like low yard per carry his way to another like top 15 fantasy season this year, which totally happened in Houston as the funniest thing ever. And I feel like that's the epitome of Najee Harris in LA. I saw somebody on Twitter say that he's going to be this year's Josh Jacobs. And that feels like a pretty big stretch, considering that I think Jacobs is way more talented. I just think he came into the situation with a lot more pass production.
Josh Jacobs rushed for 1,600 yards 2 years ago. Like Najee Harris, look, he could do that. In theory, yes. Najee Harris is likely not doing that. And there's always like $5 million. Yes, it is meaningful. That's not enough to dissuade them from drafting a running back in the second or third round. Like he could get nuked here. Like I'm fine sending a late second for Najee and hoping he survives the draft. Like that's not gonna break your team, and it gives you some interesting upside. If he survives the draft, that draft capital is gonna get more expensive. Like he's gonna cost a mid-second. So you're kind of buying low and taking that bet. I personally would make that trade if I'm looking going, I just want to survive the running back position with like him and James Conner. I think that's fine.
Yeah, I was looking at KTC. He is right behind Zach Charbonnet. I would easily take Najee Harris over Zach Charbonnet.
Yeah.
And he's actually still 3 spots behind Tyrone Tracy. I feel like I would take Najee over Tracy because I feel like both of them could have an opportunity to get a running back, but I think Tracy's odds of getting a rookie coming in are a lot higher than Najee's. And Najee's just, I think, a better fantasy running back anyway in a better offense.
I don't know if I agree there. I think I'm the opposite on that one. I think I'd prefer Tracy. I think he's more likely to survive. Only because Daboll's still there. If Daboll was gone, I'd pencil in, Armageddon for Tyrone Tracy. I don't think that's going to happen this year.
That's fair. Brian Robinson, Travis Etienne, James Conner, Trey Benson are the 4 names behind Najee. Would you take any of them over Najee?
No. I'd consider Etienne, but I don't think I would do it.
I considered B-Rob, but I think that's more of a Commanders thing, that they're just going to score a lot.
Yeah. I expect them to add a running back. That's a team I expect to add a guy.
All right. Well, that's at least Najee Harris, but that's Najee Harris. That's basically it. I do think that it depends on how you feel, or the person in your league feels about him, if they're even contending or not, or if they believe that he's this year's Josh Jacobs, then probably don't want to, I wouldn't pay a first for Najee at all. I'd be selling instantaneously if you got anywhere near that value. Najee in a second for a first, he's gone. But as a cheap RB2 producer this year, you could do a lot worse than Najee as a contender. The next big deal then was Davante Adams signing a pretty actually massive contract, 2 years, $46 million deal with the LA Rams. So he's making $23 million a year. That's pretty big money for, I mean, I get that it's Davante Adams, but even at his age, and with the dead cap that they're going to have from Cooper Kupp, who did also officially get cut. But I mean, my first reaction to this was like, holy crap, the LA Rams are going to be really good in 2025. I mean, I think that this is just good for everybody. This is obviously good for Matthew Stafford, who gets a legitimate upgrade over Cooper Kupp, especially Cooper Kupp at the end of the year. I still think that this is good for Puka. I mean, Puka's produced with good Cooper Kupp over the past 2 years, year and a half. And I think Puka's better than Davante Adams at this stage in their careers today, and is also the guy that you want to have or at least the Rams want to have for the foreseeable future as well. He's their future alpha wide receiver. So I think it's good for Puka. I think it's good for Stafford. I still think it's good for Kyron Williams. He's going to be the starter, soaking in all of these sustained drives and touchdown opportunities because Davante's there too. I just think that this is really good for everybody.
Yeah, it's one of those rare moves I don't feel like anybody loses. Like, him leaving the Jets is good for Garrett Wilson. Like, that's good for Garrett Wilson. It's obviously good for Stafford, like you said. Puka's one of those guys. Look, they could add just about any wide receiver, and I'm like, it's not bad for Puka. Puka's fine. Like, he's one of those guys that they get theirs. As long as they're not bringing in, like, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, or some other, like, top 5 wide receiver, it doesn't matter. Puka's locked in. If anybody has any concerns or wants to pivot off of him, I'm going Puka hunting. Like, that's worthwhile. Davante Adams, yeah, look, with Stafford especially, nobody locks in on a wide receiver for a game or a stretch of games like Matthew Stafford does. Like, there is an outcome here where Davante Adams pulls in 40 targets over 4 games. Like, he will have those types of runs next year. So yeah, Davante Adams, given his age, you can get him for a second round in most leagues right now. I got him for a second round last year with the Jets. I think that's a huge win for a contending roster because you expect wide receiver 2 numbers with wide receiver 1 upside still.
All right, next up on the list, we're actually going to jump to one of the other trades. I guess the only other trade really, at least offensively, was that Christian Kirk got shipped out of Jacksonville to the Houston Texans for a 2026 7th round pick. As just basically the Jaguars basically said they were going to cut Christian Kirk. Houston swooped in, said, hey, we'll at least give you a 7th for him. And they made the deal happen. And I personally think that this is just absolutely phenomenal. I think Christian Kirk is still a very good wide receiver. And that I think that he can be very productive in this offense. Houston very clearly needs another legitimate weapon across from Nico Collins, especially, I mean, that offense was so bad once Stephon Diggs got hurt, especially once Tank Dell got hurt. Dell's probably not even going to play this year. So to have the ability to go out and have Christian Kirk on your offense, who's going to be so good for CJ Stroud, I really do expect Christian Kirk to just be, like a Jacoby Myers in that offense. I think, like, you look at what Stephon Diggs was doing last year. Why can't Christian Kirk do most or that or even more than that? Like, that's how I feel. Like, I think he's a phenomenal contender, cheap production wide receiver that you can pick up. I would say I would throw a late second at him. I don't even know if you necessarily need to spend that much for him either. But that's just this just made way too much sense for me, and I love it for Christian Kirk.
Yeah, the only concern I have is what do they do about the offensive line? Because that's the main reason this offense was so bad last year. Like, they could not keep CJ Stroud upright. They could not give him time. And they've made, 2 moves to fix that. They traded away Laramie Tunsil, which very smart, good. Get rid of your only good
Wonderful
lineman. Very good move. And then they got rid of Kenyon Green, who was objectively, he was dog water last year. Like, let's just be real. He was absolutely horrible. So, like, that is, I think, addition by subtraction. But they haven't really done anything else to really overhaul this line. So I think Christian Kirk, like, Nico Collins isn't going to be the safety valve. Like, he's going to be your intermediate deep route guy that is your best clear-cut wide receiver. But the underneath stuff, yeah, Tank Dell's not playing this year. Stephon Diggs is gone. Christian Kirk's going to soak up a lot of work on these quick routes. So I think wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside should Nico Collins go down. Like you said, I think you nailed it on the price. I don't think you have to pay a second. I think you can get him for multiple thirds or a young upside wide receiver and a pick. Like, there's ways you can get Christian Kirk at an affordable rate and just kind of get easy, streamable production. Maybe similar or better than like a Darnell Mooney last year. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if he's seeing that kind of weekly ceiling with obviously some floor games mixed in. I feel like that's a really good blueprint as like a clear-cut second option in a above-average offense.
The Jaguars weren't done, though, because in this kind of overhauling in the Liam Cohen era, though, they did cut Evan Engram, and then actually like an hour before we started recording this, the news broke that Evan Engram signed a 2-year deal with the Denver Broncos. I, at least at this moment, do not know what the actual number is, but they said it was a 2-year deal. And I absolutely love this as well. I mean, like when you're thinking about where's the best place that a tight end could go, it had to have been Denver. What's up?
23 million is the number. 23 million over 2 years. That's real money. That's real money.
That is not insignificant. So I absolutely love it for Evan Engram. I think that a lot of people were talking about like, oh, he fits the Joker role or whatever. I don't care about any of that nonsense. I just think that they needed a good weapon, and I think it made sense for them to plug in a tight end who could block during, Evan Ingram's not really a blocker, but I think a tight end just made sense for him. He's going to be Bo Nix's best friend with Cortland Sutton. He's going to get a lot of targets. Sean Payton loves tight ends. I mean, I looked up, even just after the Jimmy Graham years, Jared Cook had a 700-yard and 9 touchdown season at 32 years old in New Orleans. Ben Watson had 800 yards and 6 touchdowns at 35 years old in New Orleans. So that was all, with Drew Brees. But
I was like, let's pause. There's a little bit of Drew Brees magic, but Peyton likes that role.
Mm-hmm.
And went like, I'm with you. I mean, look, this is, I think, bad for everybody not named Cortland Sutton. For people that were holding out hope that Marvin Mims, like end of year, was a glimpse into the future, he's not gonna out target Evan Engram next year. Like I'd be shocked. Devon Vele, Troy Franklin, your favorite Addison, like a bunch of those guys are just kind of waiver wire fodder in like small and short leagues. Marvin Mims, I'd be selling because at face value, you're not thinking about Marvin Mims when Evan Engram signs. They play different roles in the field. Like they're not operating in the same space, but you bring in a guy that can command 20% plus of the targets. There's only so much work, only so much work to go around. And I think him and Cortland Sutton are going to be the clear cut 1 and 2, pending like a rookie wide receiver coming in this draft.
If you were a contending roster, would you trade Tucker Kraft for Evan Engram? I'm sure you could probably get something maybe on top of Evan Engram just for the name of Tucker Kraft and the age. But I feel like that's a pretty interesting like production versus youth.
Yeah, I'm not super crazy about Tucker Kraft. I mean, the Packers have 4 wide receiver 1s. How's he going to produce? No, but I mean, look, like Tucker Kraft is, I think, too expensive in Dynasty. Just, I know you feel the same way. It's a lot of that touchdown production that is fluky year to year. And I'm looking right now. He's, tight end 10. Evan Ingram's tight end 12. Maybe you can get a third attached. A late pick, a future second might be stretching it, but like you can get something back. And if I'm, like you said, going to your question, if I'm contending, I'm going to roll the dice with Evan Engram.
Would you rather have Engram or Harold Fannin?
Evan Engram. Assuming I'm it's assuming I'm contending. Like that's the like that's a clear-cut contender to rebuilder trade that I think would be great. And you'd attach picks to Harold Fannin. You'd get picks back with Harold Fannin, I think.
I don't know. I could see it. It working out.
Evan Ingram's currently a tight end 1 in Dynasty. He's tight end 12 specifically. He'll fall behind Warren. He'll fall behind Loveland. I don't know if he falls behind Fannin. I think you can get picks back with him.
Time to move on to a topic that's very near and dear to your heart, Justin. We get to talk about your team for a second because Chicago has been making moves, dude. This isn't necessarily like none of these moves that Chicago has been making are fantasy relevant from these players specifically, but boy, do they have a big time impact on the production that this Chicago Bears offense could have. They traded for Jonah Jackson, who is a former Pro Bowler with the Detroit Lions under Ben Johnson. They traded for Joe Thuney, who I think has won 4 Super Bowl rings at this point. Phenomenal guard coming from the Kansas City Chiefs. They also signed Drew Dahlman, who's a center. According to PFF, he's the 4th highest rated center in 2024. And this was just a fun fact that I saw on Twitter like 3 hours ago. Chicago went from being dead last in 2025 dollars spent on offensive line 1 week ago to now being the 5th highest spenders on offensive line today as of this recording. So Obviously, like I said, none of these players are fantasy relevant, but boy, this could be really, really good for Caleb Williams, for Odunze, for DJ Moore, for insert Ashton Genty in the first round here, so like you're the Chicago Bears guy.
Yeah.
What's going on here?
Yeah. I mean, look, it's exciting, obviously, to see them make a concerted effort to fix. I mean, I think the biggest weakness on this team by a country mile, like it was not close. Jonah Jackson, we don't need to get into the minutia of the contracts. Jonah Jackson's really a 1-year deal. Thuney's going to be there for at least one more with a contract extension is still expected. And then Dahlman's there for several years. So this does feel like they at least have some pieces in place now with Darnell Wright and potentially Braxton Jones for the next couple of years. So from a situational perspective, this projects to be a good line for 1 to 2 seasons at a minimum. That is good for everybody you just said, like giving Caleb Williams time to develop and maybe actually throw the ball down the field. That should be helpful. And if it is Ashton Genty, which I still hope that is not the case, that's not where I want the Bears to go with their first pick. It's a huge win for Ashton Genty then. But right now, looking at who's there, like Roschon Johnson, DeAndre Swift, they have not signed anybody else in this free agency class. They're big winners. Like they are maybe not guys I'm taking flyers on. I'm not trying to buy cheap because there is so much uncertainty there. But should they survive the draft, like this run game is going to be dramatically improved. They could not block up the middle last year. It was a massive, massive issue in game planning, scheming, etc. This gives them a new element to the offense. I think Roschon Johnson is going to be your David Montgomery, right, if you will, in this offense, assuming these are the two guys moving forward. And then DeAndre Swift, I mean, we know Ben Johnson doesn't like him, but DeAndre Swift could be your DeAndre Swift in this offense, in a Swift-Montgomery pairing, because we don't have a Jahmyr Gibbs. So it's fun. It's exciting. I'm still not going out of my way necessarily to maybe bump anybody up, even in rankings, because look, like you are projecting these players for talent, and we're trying to not overreact from a dynasty perspective, at least when it comes to player value for just the offensive line.
Yeah, I did look up on KTC. He's gained 2 ranking, like he's gone up 2 spots in the rankings. He's now bumped Drake May.
Oh, Caleb Williams.
CJ Stroud. Yeah, Caleb.
Williams.
He's gone up 2 spots. He's bumped Drake May and CJ Stroud were the 2 guys that he went over. Still above Bo Nix. 1 spot behind Justin Herbert.
I think they're all in. I want Herbert over all of them still. Like I'm a Herbert guy. We know this. I'm through and through. But yeah, I think Caleb Williams deserves to be in that tier with May, Nix, and Stroud. Like at this point, they're all fun upsides with some question marks. I think those 4, right? May, Nix, Stroud, Williams, those are going to be the biggest movers, whether it's positive or negative, come the end of 2025.
Then just to kind of finish out on some of the players that are changing teams, or at least the more relevant players that are changing teams. Daniel Jones signed a 1-year, $14 million deal with the Indianapolis Colts. So they've been long talking about bringing in some competition to compete with Anthony Richardson. Daniel Jones is apparently that guy, so I don't know how competitive that's going to be for either one of them, but that's at least what we got right now in Indy. Javonte Williams, very interestingly, signed a 1-year, $3 million deal in Dallas. So at least it's a good running back, or at least a running back that we thought could be good heading into a very needy backfield. Rico Dowdle then just also signed with the Panthers earlier today. So as of right now, it really just seems like it's Javonte in Dallas. And then DeAndre Hopkins signed a 1-year, $6 million deal with the Baltimore Ravens. So those are really the 3 guys that I think matter the most from a dynasty perspective that are changing teams. I don't know if you just have some thoughts about all 3 of them or one of them specifically, but how are you feeling about these guys?
Well, I think you forgot. I mean, MVS is in Seattle.
Oh, my bad. We did. I forgot to add that to the Seattle.
That's a big one. That's a big one. Yeah, Trent Sherfield's in Denver. There's some big ones out there.
Of course. Demarcus Robinson in San Fran. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I mean, Daniel Jones, look, I think I've gone back and forth on this. Me and Addison initially talked about it. I was like, Anthony Richardson, loser. And then I remembered how bad Daniel Jones is. That's a big part of this. Look, I think I think Daniel Jones might get some starts this year. I'm not
Probably
overly confident in Anthony Richardson. So maybe there's some QB3, QB2 upside from a streaming perspective. You probably got to roster him, keep him on your bench because he is a bad throw away from starting. I'm not trading for him. Javonte, I mean, calling Javonte a good running back is a wild stretch. I
tried to rewind that by saying thought he was going to be good.
No, that's out there. It's out there. Javonte Williams is bad.
He was worse than Rico Dowdle last year.
Way worse. I don't even think it's comparable. Like Rico Dowdle, I think was good last year. You cannot say that about Javonte Williams. And I think $3 million, it feels like Jerry Jones is about to get back to his roots and draft a running back. I don't think it's going to be in the first, but there's too many guys that are available in this draft that Jerry Jones passes on all of them. He's old, he's senile, he's taking a running back when they got other holes to fill. I don't have any faith Javonte holds a job. And then Hopkins, I mean, I think it's over for him. Like he is fully washed up, which makes me sad because when I move, I got a big ass signed DeAndre Hopkins jersey. That's just not, it's useless now. So we'll figure out what to do there. But with the Ravens, I don't care. He's behind. I mean, he's not going to be the third option. He's the third option at absolute best, and I don't even think he gets there.
He's entering his Odell years, where Odell was with the Ravens and now he's with the Dolphins. I don't even know. I think he's entering now.
He's entering his Dez years, I think, which is even worse. There you go. Which is even worse than the Odell years. It's going to be bad. The Julio
Buccaneers and the Eagles.
Julio was on the Ravens, wasn't he? No, he's on the Eagles. It was a different bird. Yeah. It was a different bird. It's going to be rough. I'm not excited. The downfall's been tough to see.
The funny part though is that I saw that Lamar still only exclusively plays with first round wide receivers. That's basically all he's played with is just first round wide receivers. He's played with Dez, he's played with Odell. Rashad Bateman was a first, Zay Flowers was a first, Nelson Aguilar was a first round pick. It's just that's all he plays with.
I'm starting to think the problem's Lamar.
Oh,
I'm not one of those guys. I trust in Lamar, but that's damning evidence.
that's all he played. Sammy Watkins, he played with Sammy Watkins, first round pick. Dude, I think you're onto something here. It might be Lamar.
It's Lamar, guys.
Pittsburgh.
We cracked the code.
And then just to put a bow on this whole entire episode, I wanted to just end with all the players that just re-signed on their teams going back to the same situation. So Godwin is back in Tampa Bay, 3-year, $66 million deal. Aaron Jones back in Minnesota, 2 for $20. Hollywood is back in Kansas City on another 1-year deal, $11 million. Mike Gesicki is back in Cincy, 3 for $25. And then Zach Ertz re-signed with the Commanders, 1 for $6. The tight ends I thought were at least interesting. There were two of the older, very cheap guys that had pretty good production last year in spurts. So I don't think that they're, all that, they shouldn't be ignored, I should say, at the end of this. But Godwin, of course, is the big name. Jones, Hollywood, the tight ends. Anything on these guys?
Less about Chris Godwin, which I think this is objectively good for him. More about Jalen McMillan. I know we mentioned him up top. That's a gut punch for Jalen McMillan because it really did feel like they're going to run Evans and McMillan out there. You got the Godwin replacement. Don't pay him a third time. Let him go chase money. They kept the guy in house. That's great for Godwin. But this is, unless somebody goes down, Jalen McMillan's in a tough spot. And that is unfortunate because he was one of my, rebuild trade targets early in the offseason. I like Jalen McMillan. This puts a damper on it. Maybe I'll buy low if someone's selling dirt cheap because I think the talent's there with McMillan. We saw really good flashes. Evans is older. Godwin's older coming off of, an injury. There is upside here for McMillan to still make a name and maybe have a JSN type season, maybe in year 3. So I don't hate buying low on McMillan. Aaron Jones, love to see it. He's back as a buy low RB2 for a contender. Hollywood, I think probably disappointing if you've been holding Hollywood, hoping he was going to land somewhere new. Because you have Xavier Worthy, you have Rashee Rice, hopefully who should be healthy next year. You got Kelsey.
Hopefully not in jail.
Right, yeah. Hopefully he's not in jail. Xavier Worthy's not getting charges pressed.
Right.
So that's good. I don't think he's better than those two guys. Like, that's the problem here. So Hollywood Brown becomes a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 with some upside, which is not what you wanted. Like, you were expecting more if you held Hollywood last year.
He should have went to LA or New England or somewhere like that. Like somewhere where he could have been like what he was in Arizona, basically.
Right. Or yeah, even a tier down. This is several steps down, I think. Like that's a tough sell. Gesicki, he's interesting if they trade T. Like he has a path to be the second option in this offense. And I think that's interesting for upside at the tight end spot, at least.
He has a path to be the second option, even if they keep T. That's exactly what happened this year. Like T's not, he's not the healthiest dude all the time. So
that's fair. And then Zach Ertz, Ben Sinnott. He's on his Trey McBride arc. This is a big one now. This is what happened last time. I think I laid this out already. Look, McBride was stifled year 1. Couldn't get on the field. Zach Ertz was there. Zach Ertz came back. Nobody expected that. He then starts the year again and inevitably gets hurt, gives way to Trey McBride. All I'm saying is Ben Sinnott's about to be a top 3 tight end in the next 8 months.
There you go. Make sure you're buying. I do think that is interesting. Like if people were holding on to Sinnott, they drafted him. They knew that Ertz was supposed to be leaving. Now he's re-signs. If you can get Sinnott cheap, I definitely still think that he's very much worth it.
It's not over. It's not over for him. And what I will say, like even for Ertz, what you saw last year, I don't expect it this year because they brought in Debo. Regardless of what you think of Debo, that is another mouth to feed in this offense that will take a target share that was kind of going to Zach Ertz because they didn't have a true second weapon. So I think even Ertz, if someone's like, oh, I'll just buy low as a dirt cheap tight end and tight end premium, I think that's fine to sell. Like I'm not crazy about holding Ertz right now.
They did let go, or they didn't let go, but Diami Brown signed somewhere else too, I think. So
he came on at the end of the year. So I mean, like he really came on in the playoffs. If we're being honest, like, it was wild. But I think it's Terry and Debo. Ertz is a distant third now.
Yeah. The last thing, just to circle back on McMillan, for me personally, I do agree with you that I think that if somebody's selling him cheap, I'd be willing to buy into it. I mean, remember, like Godwin was behind D-Jack and Mike Evans still at that time too. Like it took a couple years for Chris Godwin even to see meaningful snaps, and then, ripped off like 3 really good seasons. I think he had a wide receiver 2 overall season in like 2019 or 2020 or something like that before the first round of couple injuries for him. And who knows, maybe Godwin, it was kind of not like a devastating injury, but it was a pretty bad injury that he ended the season on last year. So if he starts slow or doesn't even start at all, maybe he's on the PUP list, like McMillan is certainly not dead and can come back from this as well. I think he definitely showed enough talent.
If you want to talk about a little bit of nuance with Jalen McMillan, the last piece I'll say on him, under 500 yards his rookie year, it's probably going to be an uphill battle to get over 750 in year 2. It's the track we follow with rookie face planners. He is on that perfect trajectory to maybe be one of those late breakout guys that we just keep on our radar, because the situation is not going to be conducive to him going over 750 next year, barring some injuries. So maybe we follow our own advice that I always preach is, like, if you don't want to buy him now, he's probably going to be cheaper at the end of year 2. So it's something to keep in mind. Because look, regardless of if you think Geno is an elite quarterback, which I think most people would agree he's not, he's at least a stagnant or even an uptick from Gardner Minshew and Alex O'Connell last year. Dude, I knew it. I
was going to let you
know.
It. Why don't you just say O'Connell? Why do you always say Alex?
Do it.